Ethan sat in the sterile, dimly lit room, his mind racing. He had been on countless diplomatic missions before, but nothing compared to this one. The alien planet of Xandor 7 was unlike anything he had ever imagined. Towering spires of crystalline, buildings stretched into the sky, glowing with an ethereal light. The air was thick with a strange but pleasant fragrance, and the colors of the landscape were otherworldly, shifting as if alive. Today, Ethan was summoned to meet Queen Zorathis, the ruler of this strange world. He had heard stories about her, a powerful leader, known for her sharp mind and unyielding rule. Yet there was a rumor that no one ever truly knew her thoughts, her emotions, her desires. She was a mystery. The guards led him down a long corridor, their footsteps echoing. In the silent palace, the walls were adorned with shimmering artwork, depicting battles and celebrations of Zorathis's ancient lineage. As they approached the grand throne room, the guards stopped, bowing before opening the massive doors. Ethan took a deep breath before stepping inside. The throne room was vast and the air was thick with an ancient, regal atmosphere. At the far end of the room, seated on an ornate throne, was Queen Zorathis. Her appearance was as striking as the legends had described. Her skin glimmered with a faint pearlescent glow, and her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, seemed to see through him. Her long, dark hair cascaded around her shoulders, moving as if stirred by an invisible breeze. She regarded him with a calm, almost detached expression, her gaze never leaving his face as he walked forward. Her voice was smooth like silk, but there was an edge to it. "Human," she said, her tone both curious and commanding. "I've heard much about your kind. Tell me, what makes you so different from the others?" Ethan, still taken aback by her presence, struggled to find the right words. He had prepared for this moment, but the reality of it was overwhelming. "We're adaptable," he finally said, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "We thrive in many environments. We learn quickly and we fight for survival." Zorathis raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Survival, a fascinating concept. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me, human, what do you fight for?" Ethan swallowed hard. "We fight for freedom, for those we love, for a better future." The queen studied him for a moment, her lips curling into a subtle smile. "How noble," she said softly. "But how many of your kind truly understand the weight of that word? Freedom? Love?" Her gaze intensified, and Ethan felt an uncomfortable chill run down his spine. Before he could respond, Zorathis stood from her throne, her movement smooth and fluid, like water. She took a few steps forward, her height towering over him. Ethan's heart raced and he instinctively took a step back. But she didn't stop. Reaching out, she grabbed his wrist with a strength that startled him. Her fingers were cool yet firm, sending a jolt of electricity through his body. "Why don't you touch me, human?" Zorathis's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried an undeniable weight. "You seem so confident in your words, but why don't you touch me?" Ethan blinked in surprise, his mind struggling to catch up with her words. Touch her? Was she serious? He had never imagined this scenario. In his training, no one had ever mentioned anything like this. His first instinct was to pull away, but there was something in her eyes, a challenge perhaps, or something more, that made him freeze. I'm not sure what you mean, Your Majesty," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "I'm not here for that." Zorathis's grip tightened slightly, though not painfully. "Not here for what?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. "You think your kind is the only one capable of understanding connection?" She tilted her head, studying him with a curious, almost playful look. "I wonder how long you'll keep denying it." The air between them seemed to crackle with energy, and Ethan felt the weight of her words settling in his chest. What was she asking? Was this some sort of test? He had been prepared to talk about politics, about interstellar relations, but this was nothing like he had expected. Zorathis released his wrist, though her gaze never wavered. "I'm not sure whether I should be disappointed or amused." "Human," she said, her voice returning to its calm, commanding tone. "But I do expect honesty. You'll find that lying to me will not end well." Ethan could only nod, still trying to process what had just happened. He had never been in a situation like this. No human had ever stood before an alien queen, and certainly none had ever been asked such a direct question. What did she want from him? Was this a cultural difference, a test of power, or something deeper? Zorathis turned away, her long cloak sweeping across the floor as she walked back to her throne. She sat down, her posture regal and composed once more. "You are dismissed for now, human," she said, her voice softening just a touch. "We'll meet again soon." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to speak or leave. After a long, tense silence, he gave a slight bow and turned to leave, his thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. As the doors closed behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was only the beginning. What had Zorathis meant by her words? Why had she asked him that question? And why did he feel like he was being drawn into something much bigger than a simple diplomatic mission? The answers were just beyond his reach, and for the first time in his life, Ethan realized that he had no idea what to expect next. The days after his meeting with Queen Zorathis were strange. Ethan found himself replaying their conversation over and over in his mind, each time with a different interpretation. He had never met anyone like her. There was something magnetic about her presence that he couldn't ignore. The way she had looked at him, her gaze intense as if she saw more than just his face, haunted him. It wasn't just her beauty, though, that was undeniable. It was the power she exuded, the quiet command in her every movement. For the next few days, Ethan's schedule was packed with meetings and discussions about the future of the human colony on Xandor 7. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on the mission, his thoughts always seemed to drift back to the Queen. What had she meant when she grabbed his wrist? Why had she asked him why he didn't touch her? Was it a test? A game? Or was she genuinely curious about him? He tried to shake off the thoughts, reminding himself that he was here for diplomatic purposes, not personal ones. But every time he passed the grand hall where the Queen held court, a strange pull drew him in. It was as if he could feel her presence, even from a distance. The last time he had been in her presence, he had barely been able to form a coherent sentence. What would happen if they met again? His question was answered sooner than he expected. It was late afternoon when he received the message. The Queen had requested his presence. His heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what this meant, but he knew he couldn't refuse. The guards led him back to the throne room, and his mind raced with possibilities. What was she going to say this time? What did she want from him? As he entered the throne room, he noticed that the atmosphere was different. The usual cold, regal air of the palace seemed warmer now. The Queen wasn't seated on her throne. Instead, she stood near a large window, gazing out at the alien landscape. Her back was to him, and she didn't turn as he entered. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but with an underlying tension that made his skin prickle. "I've been thinking about our last meeting." Ethan stood still, unsure of how to respond. He didn't want to overstep, but the Queen's sudden change in demeanor intrigued him. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about it too." She turned to face him, her violet eyes piercing through him once more. She seemed different somehow, softer, but there was still the same intensity that commanded respect. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary before she spoke again. "I can't help but wonder why you didn't touch me," she said, her voice low and almost playful. "Is it because you're afraid of me, human? Or is there something else?" Ethan felt his pulse quicken. There it was again. That same question. The same unsettling curiosity in her tone. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. At first, what could he say? He was caught between honesty and caution. His mission required him to remain professional, to avoid becoming entangled in anything personal. But the Queen was pressing. and the challenge in her voice made it hard to resist. I didn't know how to respond, Ethan admitted, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. You surprised me. Zorathus nodded, her expression unreadable. I see, she said, her voice softer now. But why? Why does the touch of a queen, an alien, have to surprise you? She took a step closer to him, her presence overwhelming in a way he had never experienced before. Why do you humans hold back so much? What are you afraid of? Ethan swallowed. This wasn't just about physical touch anymore. There was something deeper in her words, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about himself, about his mission, and about her. I'm not afraid, he said quietly. I just didn't want to overstep. Zorathus tilted her head, her lips curving into a faint smile. Interesting, she said. And yet, you seem to be overstepping now, aren't you? Her gaze softened just slightly, but the intensity was still there like a fire waiting to burn. Ethan could feel the tension between them growing, but he didn't know how to ease it. He was drawn to her in a way he hadn't been prepared for. There was a quiet power in the Queen's presence, an energy that seemed to wrap around him, pulling him in. But he couldn't let himself become too distracted. He was here for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with his growing attraction to the Queen. I'm not sure what you want from me, Ethan admitted, his voice tinged with uncertainty. We're from different worlds, different species. We shouldn't, Zorathus interrupted, her voice sharp. Tell me, human, why should there be boundaries between us? Between you and me? What makes you think you are incapable of understanding me? Ethan was taken aback by her words. She was right. He had been the one to put up the boundaries, to assume that they couldn't be more than two beings from different worlds. But there was something about Zorathus that made him question those assumptions. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met before. She was alien, yes, but also human in a way he couldn't explain. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe I'm afraid of what happens if I cross that line. Zorathus stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that left him breathless. What happens if you don't? She asked softly. Ethan felt his heart race. There was no going back now. He knew he was teetering on the edge of something dangerous, something he might not be able to control. But there was a part of him that didn't want to turn away, a part of him that wanted to understand the Queen, to explore the connection between them, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. I don't know, he whispered, his voice almost a breath, but I think I want to find out. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Zorathus broke it, her voice soft but commanding. Then come closer, human, she said, her eyes never leaving his. And let me show you what happens next. Ethan's mind was spinning. He had never expected to feel so conflicted. One moment he was standing in the grand throne room of an alien queen, his heart racing from the heat of their exchange. The next, he found himself walking beside her, feeling as if he was stepping into unknown territory, unsure of what lay ahead. The Queen, Zorathus, had invited him to join her for a walk through the palace gardens, a place few others were allowed to visit. The air was warmer here, tinged with the scent of exotic flowers that bloomed in strange patterns. The plants seemed to pulse with energy, their colors shifting as the light changed. It was a place of peace and beauty, a sharp contrast to the tense atmosphere of the throne room. As they walked in silence, Ethan couldn't help but steal glances at the Queen. She seemed different now, her earlier intensity replaced by something more introspective. She looked at the flowers, her eyes soft as though lost in thought. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Your Majesty, he began, trying to sound as respectful as possible. I've been wondering, why did you ask me those questions about touching you? Zorathus stopped walking, her gaze falling on a large, vibrant flower, She reached out a hand, carefully touching its petals as if gathering her thoughts. "You want to know why?" she said quietly. "But the real question is why not? Why don't you allow yourself to reach out, to touch?" She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You humans talk about freedom, about connections, but when faced with the opportunity, you hesitate." Ethan felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had thought he understood the concept of connection, but now, standing before the Queen, he wasn't so sure. Was it his own hesitation, his fear of what crossing that line would mean, that kept him from reaching out to her? Or was it something more? I didn't want to offend you," he admitted, his voice low. "I didn't want to overstep." Zarathus's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You humans are so afraid of making mistakes," she said, her voice tinged with something that almost sounded like sadness. "You hold back from touching, from connecting, because you fear what might happen. But sometimes it is in those very moments of crossing a boundary that we learn the most about ourselves." Her words struck a chord deep within him. There was something profound in her statement, something he had never fully considered. He had been so focused on the rules, the expectations of his mission, that he hadn't allowed himself to truly connect with anyone, not in the way Zarathus was asking. He looked at her, his curiosity growing. "What about you, Your Majesty? What is it that makes you want to connect?" For a long moment, Zarathus didn't respond. She continued to walk, her steps slow and deliberate. Ethan followed, trying to read her expression, but it was hard to decipher. Finally, she spoke. "I was never meant to be a ruler," she said softly. "My family was one of the many royal families on this planet, each vying for power. But my parents, they died young. Their deaths were not peaceful. They were a result of betrayal, of the constant struggle for control." She paused, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "I was too young to understand it then, but now I see it for what it was. A need for power that tore everything apart." Ethan listened quietly, his heart aching for her. He had known that Zarathus had inherited the throne after her parents' deaths, but he hadn't realized how much pain was tied to it. Her coldness, her aloofness, it all began to make sense. She had been shaped by loss, by the brutal reality of ruling a world where trust was a rare commodity. "My people," Zarathus continued, her voice growing softer, "we were taught to be strong, to rule with an iron fist. But I have never felt strong. I've only ever felt alone. I never had the chance to experience what it was like to have someone care for me, to feel safe, to know love." She turned to him then, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that took him by surprise. "And that is why I am curious about you, Ethan. About your kind. You speak of love, of freedom, of connection. But I wonder if you truly understand what it means." Ethan's chest tightened. He had never seen this side of Zarathus before. The Queen, who was once distant and unapproachable, was now opening up to him, showing a vulnerability he hadn't expected. It was as if she had been waiting for someone to ask her the right questions, someone who would listen without judgment. "I don't know if I do," Ethan said quietly, "but I think I'm starting to understand." Zarathus nodded, her expression softening. "Perhaps we all are, in our own ways." They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Ethan couldn't help but think about how much he had underestimated the Queen. He had come here expecting to deal with a ruler, someone whose motivations were purely political, but now he saw that there was so much more to her than that. She wasn't just the Queen of Xandor 7. She was a person, someone who had been shaped by the loss of family, by the weight of responsibility, and by the loneliness of leadership. Finally, they reached a secluded part of the garden. It was a quiet, peaceful spot, far from the noise of the palace. Zarathus stopped and turned to face him, her expression serious once more. "There is something I must ask of you, Ethan," she said, her voice steady, Something that may change everything. Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. What is it? Zarathus took a deep breath. You must know that there are many who would do anything to see me fail. There are factions within my court that are plotting against me. They want my throne, my power. She looked away for a moment, her eyes darkening. I am not sure how long I can protect myself, but there is one thing that might help. What is it? Ethan asked, his voice filled with concern. I need someone I can trust, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone who can stand by my side, who understands the risks. Someone who will protect me even if it means going against everything they know. Ethan's mind raced. Was she asking him to become involved in her political struggles? To risk his own life? For her safety? He had never signed up for anything like this. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw the desperation, the raw honesty in her gaze. He knew there was no turning back now. I will stand by your side, Ethan said, his voice firm. I'll help you, Your Majesty. Whatever it takes. Zarathus didn't smile, but the look in her eyes softened. Thank you, Ethan, she said quietly. You may never understand the gravity of what you've agreed to, but I promise you, this is more than just a duty. It's a choice. And I will not forget it. As they stood in the quiet garden, Ethan felt something shift within him. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He wasn't just a visitor in an alien world. He had chosen to stand beside the Queen, to protect her, not just as a ruler but as a person. And in doing so, he had crossed a line he could never uncross. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Ethan's promise to Zarathus was not one he could take lightly. Every moment spent in her presence, every conversation, felt like a new step into uncharted territory. The Queen's trust in him had opened a door that he wasn't sure he was prepared to walk through. But there was no going back now. Zarathus had given him a role, an important one, and one that carried great risk. She had made it clear that there were those within her court who wanted her to fail, who would stop at nothing to see her removed from power, and she had confided in him that she needed someone to watch her back, to stand by her side when the inevitable conflict came. Ethan had agreed without fully understanding the depths of the challenges he would face. Still, despite the dangers, there was something about the way Zarathus had looked at him that made him believe in her. She wasn't just the queen of an alien world. She was a woman who had been shaped by loss, by betrayal, and by the loneliness of power. She had a fire within her that Ethan couldn't help but admire, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Zarathus asked Ethan to meet her in her private chambers. The guards at the door nodded as he passed, and he stepped inside, the room quiet and serene. Unlike the formal throne room, Zarathus' chambers were more personal, adorned with rich fabrics and soft lighting that made the atmosphere feel warmer. There were no grand displays of wealth or power here, just a sense of peace, a refuge from the chaos of her rule. Zarathus was sitting at a large desk, scribbling notes on a datapad, her face a mask of concentration. When Ethan entered, she looked up, her expression softening as she saw him. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of something else beneath it. "I'm glad you're here." He nodded, walking toward her. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes," she replied, setting down the datapad. "There's something I need to discuss, something that may change everything." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The tone in her voice made it clear that whatever she was about to say was serious. "What is it?" Zarathus took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I've received word of a plot against me. There are several factions within my court who believe I am too weak to rule. They are planning to move against me, to take my throne. I've known about this for some time, but now I have confirmation. The time is near." Ethan's stomach dropped. He had known that there were threats, but hearing it from her made the danger feel all too real. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice steady though his mind was racing. Zarathus stood up and walked toward him, her eyes locking with his. "I need you to protect me, Ethan. I need you to be my shield, physically and politically. There are people who want to harm me, and I can't do this alone, not anymore. Ethan felt a surge of determination. He had already promised to stand by her side, but now he understood the true gravity of what that meant. I'm with you, he said firmly. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Zarathis nodded, her gaze softening. Thank you. I knew I could count on you. There was a moment of silence between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Ethan could see the vulnerability in her eyes now, a side of her he hadn't seen before. Despite her power, despite the strength she projected, she was still a woman who had been hurt, who had carried the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders for far too long. I've spent my whole life in this palace, surrounded by people who only want to use me, she continued, her voice quieter now. I've never had anyone I could truly trust, Ethan, not until now. Her words struck him like a blow. He hadn't expected her to open up like this, to share her fears with him. It was a side of the Queen that he hadn't seen, a side that was raw and human. I know what it's like to feel alone, Ethan said, softly. To be surrounded by people but still feel like there's no one who understands. But you don't have to be alone anymore, Zarathis. I'm here. I'll stay by your side. Zarathis's eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of something like hope in her gaze. It was brief, but it was there. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. You don't need to thank me, Ethan replied, stepping closer. I want to help you. I promised I would, and I meant it. Zarathis took a step back, her expression changing to one of uncertainty. There's something else I need to tell you, Ethan. Something I've kept hidden from everyone, even from myself. Ethan frowned. What is it? She took another deep breath. I don't know how to explain this, but there's something about you, something that I can't ignore. It's more than just trust. I find myself drawn to you in a way that I've never felt before. You've become important to me, more than I ever expected, and I'm not sure what that means. Ethan's heart raced. He had felt it too, the strange pull between them, the growing connection that neither of them had asked for but couldn't deny. But hearing her admit it out loud made everything feel even more complicated. I don't know what it means either, Ethan said, his voice low. But I know that I care about you, Zarathis, and I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, emotions neither of them had been willing to confront until now. Zarathis looked down at the floor, her hands trembling slightly. I've never been loved, Ethan, she whispered. Not truly. I've never known what it feels like to have someone care for me without wanting something in return. Ethan took a step forward, gently lifting her chin so that she looked up at him. You are worthy of love, Zarathis. You don't have to do this alone. You've already proven that you are strong, stronger than anyone I know. But that doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of the galaxy on your shoulders by yourself. She looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face as though looking for the truth in his words. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She didn't have to face this alone. Zarathis slowly reached out, her hand trembling as she placed it on his chest. Thank you, Ethan, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. Ethan reached out and gently placed his hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her touch. You don't have to thank me. I'm with you, always. And in that moment, everything changed. Ethan wasn't just a protector anymore. He wasn't just a diplomat or a visitor on an alien world. He was someone who had become deeply entwined in the life of the alien queen, someone who would fight for her not just as a ruler, but as a person. They didn't speak again that night. There were no more words to say. They stood together side by side, facing the uncertainty ahead. The days after their conversation in the Queen's chambers felt like a turning point, not just for Ethan and Zarathis, but for the future of Xandor 7 itself. The palace was on high alert. Whispers of rebellion and betrayal had spread throughout. The court, And now that Ethan had pledged to protect Zorathis, he found himself in the center of the storm. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He wasn't just a visitor. He was her shield, and that was a responsibility he took seriously. Every moment spent near Zorathis now felt like a delicate balance. He was both her protector and, in many ways, her confidant. They spent long hours together, walking through the palace gardens, discussing strategies, and sometimes just sitting in silence, letting the weight of their situation settle over them. Ethan could see how much Zorathis had changed since they first met. She was no longer the cold, distant queen he had first encountered. There were still moments when the weight of her crown seemed unbearable, when the fear of betrayal threatened to overtake her. But there was also a new sense of trust between them. She allowed herself to rely on him in ways that she hadn't done with anyone else. But even as their bond grew stronger, the dangers surrounding them continued to escalate. One evening, as they sat in the private chamber that Zorathis had transformed into a space of refuge, the atmosphere in the room felt different. The palace had been buzzing with rumors of a coup. Zorathis had received word of a planned assassination attempt, and Ethan knew that the time had come to act. Zorathis looked at him, her face a mixture of determination and anxiety. "The time is almost upon us, Ethan," she said, her voice steady but laced with tension. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by power, but now it's clear that I can't do this alone. You've been my strength, but I need more than just your protection. I need your help to fight back." Ethan nodded, his mind focused. The past few days had prepared him for this. The plan they had worked out together was simple. Ethan would work alongside her closest allies to expose the traitors within the palace, while Zorathis would confront those who sought to overthrow her. They had no time to waste. "I'm with you," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We'll make sure you're safe, and we'll make sure the traitors pay for what they've done." Zorathis gave him a small, appreciative smile. "I knew I could. Count on you." It wasn't long before the plan was set into motion. In the dead of night, under the cover of darkness, they began to take action. Ethan moved quickly, gathering the loyal guards and allies who had been working in the shadows. There were whispers of betrayal among the court, and Ethan knew they had to act fast before the conspirators had a chance to strike. Zorathis, for the first time since the beginning of the rebellion, showed a side of herself that Ethan hadn't fully seen. She was no longer the queen hiding behind a throne. She was a leader, fierce and unyielding, standing side by side with those who believed in her. There was a fire in her eyes that reminded Ethan of the woman he had come to care about, not just the ruler, but the person beneath the crown. Together, they worked through the night, gathering evidence, questioning suspects, and laying traps for those who sought to destroy Zorathis's reign. It wasn't easy. Trust had to be earned, even among allies, and the tension between the palace factions was palpable. But Zorathis was not the kind of queen to back down. She was a survivor, and now she was determined to reclaim her throne. As the sun began to rise the next morning, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Ethan and Zorathis stood together, watching the palace courtyard from a balcony. The early light casting long shadows across the stone floors. Their work was not done, but the worst of it was over. The conspirators had been exposed, their plans unraveled. The kingdom, it seemed, would be safe for now. Zorathis turned to Ethan, her expression softer than it had been in days. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. "You've given me something I thought I would never have again. Peace." Ethan looked at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "You did this, Zorathis. You fought for your people, for your future. I'm just glad I could be a part of it." Zorathis stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. For a moment there was nothing between them. No politics, no responsibilities, no kingdom. Just two people who had been through something, together, and had come out the other side stronger for it. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done anything without you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had promised to protect her, to stand by her side, but he had never expected to feel this way, this deeply connected to someone who had once been a stranger to him. There was no denying the bond between them now, and though they both knew the road ahead would be difficult, there was a sense of certainty between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Zarathis reached out, her hand finding his. "We have a lot to rebuild, Ethan. But with you by my side, I feel like we can take on anything." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. "I'm with you, always." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of their words settling in the air. There was no going back now. They had fought for Zarathis' kingdom, and they had fought for each other. They had both changed in ways they couldn't have imagined before. As they stood there, side by side, looking out at the future they would build together, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, battles to fight, and obstacles to overcome. But one thing was certain. Zarathis was no longer the lonely queen she had once been. She was surrounded by those who loved her, those who would fight for her, and most importantly, she had someone who would stand by her side through it all. And as for Ethan, he knew he had found something more than just a mission on Xandor 7. He had found a purpose, a reason to fight, and a person who had changed his life in ways he never thought possible. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were partners, and nothing could break the bond they had formed.